Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. I ran my fingers over the faded wallpaper, tracing the familiar patterns I had memorized as a child. The house still smelled the same: aged wood, old books, and the faint scent of my grandfather's favorite pipe lingering in the air. This wasn't just a house, it was my world. I could still hear the echo of my childhood in these walls. The nights I spent curled up in my grandfather's study, listening to his deep, steady voice as he told me stories of our family's history. The way he'd chuckle when I asked too many questions, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners as he promised, "One day, Claire, all of this will be yours." It was a promise I had clung to my entire life. Unlike my parents and my sister Bella, who only saw the house as an asset, my grandfather understood what it truly meant: legacy, history, family. I was the only one who cared enough to listen, to appreciate the home that had stood for generations. I was the only one who truly loved it. My grandfather had always been my anchor in a family that barely acknowledged me. While my parents showered Bella with love, attention, and every opportunity they could afford, I was left to fend for myself. Bella was their golden child, beautiful, charming, and effortlessly perfect. She never had to work for anything. If she wanted a new dress, my mother bought it without question. If she wanted to quit something she had started, my father praised her for knowing what she wanted. I, on the other hand, had to earn everything. Good grades weren't enough. My parents barely glanced at my report cards. Achievements didn't matter unless they made them look good. I was the daughter who worked hard, who followed the rules, who never caused trouble. Yet no matter what I did, I was never enough. But my grandfather saw me. He saw my curiosity, my hunger to learn, my love for history and tradition. He knew that out of everyone in the family, I was the only one who deserved this house. So he promised it to me. "This is your home, Claire," he told me one evening as we sat on the grand staircase, his arm wrapped around my shoulder. "Not just because you love it, but because you understand it. You respect it, and that means something." I had believed him. I had trusted him. I had never once imagined that promise would be broken. When my grandfather passed away, I was devastated. His absence left a hole in my life that nothing could fill. But in the days that followed, I held on to his promise, believing that at the very least, his final wishes would be honored. Then my parents announced that they were selling the house. The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" My voice cracked, my hands tightening into fists. "You can't sell it. Grandpa left it to me. You know that." My mother barely looked up from her glass of wine. "Don't be dramatic, Claire. The will didn't say anything about you. That didn't make sense. It had to be a mistake. Where is the will?" I demanded. My father exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose like I was exhausting him. "The official records don't mention you. The house, say, is legally ours, and we've made our decision." I felt my stomach drop. "That's not possible. He told me it doesn't matter what he told you," my mother cut in, finally looking at me with her usual cold disinterest. "The house will do more for this family if we sell it. The money is going to Bella's wedding." I couldn't breathe. Bella's wedding? They were selling my home to pay for Bella's wedding. Bella, who had never wanted anything to do with this house, who had once called it old and depressing when Grandpa wasn't around to hear her, was now getting married to Ryan, the picture-perfect husband, wealthy and connected. He was their golden ticket. They were already planning around the money they would get from him, and wanted to make sure they looked good and wealthy in his eyes, as well to make sure everything goes smoothly. The anger inside me burned hotter than I'd ever felt before. "This house is mine," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "You know it is." Bella finally spoke, flipping her perfect hair over her shoulder as she smirked. "God, Claire, don't be so selfish. It's just a house. Just a house. My home, my grandfather's legacy gone." I turned to my parents, desperate, pleading, "Don't do this." My father's expression was one of calculated finality. "It's done. The sale is already in motion." I looked at my mother, but she was already glancing at Bella with a proud smile, discussing flower arrangements and designer wedding dresses, as if my entire world hadn't just been torn apart. That's when I knew I meant nothing to them. I was never the daughter they wanted. I was never part of their plans. Bella's happiness mattered. Their status mattered. But me? I was disposable. I sat across from my mother. My fingers clenched so tightly into fists that my nails dug into my palm. The walls of my childhood home, the home my grandfather had promised to me, seemed to close in around me as she spoke. Bella needs this more than you. You should be happy for her. Happy? I let out a hollow laugh, shaking my head in disbelief. Happy? My voice wavered, but I refused to let the tears fall. You're selling Grandpa's house, my house, to fund a wedding, and you expect me to be happy? My mother sighed dramatically, as if I were being unreasonable. Claire, Bella is starting a new life. Do you have any idea how expensive weddings are? The venue, the dress, the guest list, these things cost money. My stomach twisted in disgust. You're selling our family home for a dress? For some overpriced party? She clicked her tongue, her expression icy and dismissive. It's not just a dress, it's her future. And let's be honest, Claire, you don't really need the house. I don't need it? I swallowed the bitter words rising in my throat. Grandpa left it to me, I said, my voice softer now, desperate. You both know that. He told me. He didn't put it in writing. My father interrupted, his tone final. I turned to him, searching his face for something, anything, that resembled regret. There was nothing. Dad, please, I whispered. This house meant everything to Grandpa. He didn't want it sold. You know that he barely even looked at me. You'll understand when you have a family of your own, he said simply. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made for the greater good. I stared at him, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't a sacrifice. This was theft, a cruel, deliberate choice to erase me from the family. I turned to Bella, my last hope. Maybe, just maybe, she would see how much this hurt me. Maybe she would tell them to stop. But she didn't even look up from her phone. Claire, don't be so dramatic, she said, scrolling casually. It's just a house. Just a house. The walls that held my childhood dreams. The floors I had danced across as a kid pretending I was on stage while Grandpa clapped along. The kitchen where he had taught me how to make pancakes on Sunday mornings. Bella had never cared about this house. But I did, and now it was gone. The house sold within a week. I didn't even get to say goodbye. One day it was mine. The next it belonged to strangers, and my parents, they didn't look back. The money from the sale was funneled straight into Bella's dream wedding. It wasn't a quiet, modest ceremony. No, it was a spectacle. Photos flooded social media. Lavish pre-wedding parties. An extravagant ceremony in a historic Italian villa. A designer wedding gown worth more than most people's annual salary. Every post, every smiling face, every glittering champagne glass was another knife in my heart. They didn't just take the house, they took everything. And the final blow. I wasn't even invited. Not a single message, not a single call. I had been erased. I sat in my tiny apartment staring at my phone. The pictures of Bella's wedding mocked me from the screen, each one more unbearable than the last. I scrolled through them slowly, my chest tight, my breath shaky. There was my mother, glowing with pride as she adjusted Bella's veil. There was my father, toasting the happy couple, his smile wide and carefree. And there was Bella laughing, twirling in the middle of a marble-floored ballroom. The perfect princess in the perfect wedding. Paid for with the home that should have been mine. I thought I had felt rage before. I hadn't, not like this. I threw my phone onto the couch and pressed my palms against my face, my body shaking. I had done everything right. I had been the good daughter, the quiet daughter, the responsible one. And it hadn't mattered. They had thrown me away like I was nothing. Well, they wanted me gone. Fine. I would disappear. I would walk away from them the same way they had walked away from me. No calls, no messages, no forwarding address. They didn't deserve me, and one day they would regret it. I had nothing. No home, no safety net, no one to call for help. When I walked away from my family, I truly walked away. At first, I told myself that maybe, just maybe my phone would ring. Maybe my mother would realize what she had done. Maybe my father would feel a sliver of guilt. Maybe Bella, wrapped up in her luxurious wedding, would pause for one moment to wonder where I was, but the days passed and my phone stayed silent. The world moved on without me, and I had no choice but to do the same. The reality of being on my own hit me hard. I had no savings. Every penny my grandfather had intended for me was gone, funneled into Bella's perfect life. My family had ensured that I had nothing. No financial cushion to land on. No inheritance to claim. Rent in the city was brutal, and my options were limited. I scraped together what little money I had left and found a room in a rundown apartment complex where the walls were paper thin and the ceiling leaked whenever it rained. It smelled like damp wood and stale air, but it was mine. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I would figure it out. At first, I took whatever work I could find. I waited tables at a 24-hour diner, the kind of place where exhausted workers came in at 2 a.m. looking for cheap coffee and a quiet corner to rest. The pay was dismal, and the tips weren't much better. My feet ached every night. My uniform smelled like grease, and I learned quickly that people could be cruel to those they saw as beneath them. During the day, I stocked shelves at a grocery store, pushing heavy carts and organizing cans of soup while families shopped around me oblivious. When that still wasn't enough, I took a third job cleaning office buildings late at night. By the time I got home, I could barely stand. My hands were raw, my body exhausted, but I refused to stop. There were nights I sat on the thin mattress of my bed, staring at my phone, debating whether to call my mother. The urge to hear her voice, to ask if she even thought about me, was overwhelming. But then I remembered the way she had looked at me when she told me the house was gone. No remorse, no hesitation. Just the certainty that Bella mattered and I didn't. So I buried the longing deep and threw myself back into work. One night, after finishing a particularly grueling double shift, I collapsed into a seat at a small cafe, my body too tired to move. The place was nearly empty, save for a young man at the table next to mine, his face buried in a stack of papers, a laptop open in front of him. His hair was messy, his coffee cup nearly empty, and he looked like he was fighting a battle with numbers and losing. I didn't mean to stare, but after a few moments, he sighed and muttered something under his breath. "You look like you're 2 steps away from a breakdown," I said before I could stop myself. He looked up, startled, before letting out a dry laugh. "More like 1 step," he admitted, rubbing his temples. I didn't know why, but something about his exhaustion made me feel less alone. "What's the crisis?" "Trying to launch a business," he said, waving a hand over the mess in front of him. "Except I have no money, no connections, and I'm pretty sure I have no idea what I'm doing." I let out a small chuckle despite my exhaustion. "Sounds familiar." That was the night I met Noah. We started talking, trading stories about struggling to get by. He told me about his idea, an online marketplace that focused on small creators, helping them sell their products without being buried by big corporations. He had passion but not the resources to make it happen. I told him about my own struggles, about how I was barely staying afloat. Somewhere between our shared frustrations and too many cups of coffee, an idea started forming. What if we built something together? At first, it was just a conversation, a wild, impossible dream. But the more we talked, the more it made sense. I had nothing to lose, and neither did he. We started small, late nights in that same cafe, scribbling ideas on napkins, researching everything we could. Noah had the technical skills. I had the drive and organization to bring the business side together. We pulled what little savings we had, scraped together just enough to launch a website, and started reaching out to small artisans and creators, offering them a platform with fair commission rates. The first few months were brutal. Orders were slow, suppliers backed out, and there were nights I lay awake wondering if we had made a mistake. We had no big investors, no safety net. Every cent we made went right back into the business, and I kept my part-time jobs just to afford food. There were days I wanted to quit when the weight of it all felt unbearable. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered the last time I had let someone else control my fate. I had let my family take everything from me once. I wasn't about to let the world do the same. And then it happened. We got a bulk order from a major retailer. It wasn't a life-changing amount of money, but it was enough. Enough to cover our costs. Enough to pay ourselves even just a little. Enough to prove that we were onto something real. For the first time since I had walked away from my family, I felt like I was winning. I moved out of that awful apartment. It wasn't a penthouse, but it was clean, safe, and mine. I quit one of my jobs, finally able to dedicate more time to growing the business. The long nights, the stress, the exhaustion. It was finally paying off. I had spent so much of my life fighting to be seen by people who never cared. Now, for the first time, I was building something for myself, something that had nothing to do with them. I had left their world behind, and I wasn't looking back. There was a time when I thought success would feel like an explosion, a single defining moment where I would finally stand tall and declare victory. But that's not how it happened. Success came in quiet, relentless steps, through exhaustion, through failure, through pushing forward when the world told me to quit. It came in the form of sleepless nights, endless negotiations, and deals that could make or break us in an instant. Noah and I started small, just two ambitious people with nothing but a dream and the sheer will to make it work. The early days were brutal. We poured every cent we had into our company, taking risks that made no sense on paper, but felt right in our gut. As we couldn't afford rent, nights we lived off vending machine snacks. Days when rejection after rejection made me wonder if my parents had been right about me all along. But we didn't stop. We studied the market, found the gaps that bigger companies ignored, and built something no one saw coming. We worked harder than anyone else, outmaneuvering those who dismissed us, making connections with people who believed in our vision. Then, almost overnight, everything changed. One day we were just another startup trying to survive. The next, we were everywhere. Our platform revolutionized the market, giving independent creators a space to sell, connect, and grow their businesses in ways they never could before. Orders flooded in, partnerships solidified, and investors lined up to be part of what we had built. The company went from a struggling passion project to a multi-million-dollar empire. I wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. I was a powerhouse, a name whispered in elite business circles, a woman no one could overlook. Then one afternoon, as I was reviewing some expansion plans in my office, I saw it. A news article. Ryan Westbrook faces financial collapse. Business mogul struggles after series of bad investments. I clicked the link so fast my fingers barely registered the movement. My eyes scanned the words, soaking up every delicious detail. His empire was crumbling. The same man my parents had sacrificed me for, the man they had built their entire future on, was falling apart. A slow smirk curled on my lips. His business had been a dominant force in luxury real estate for years, but it seemed that years of reckless spending had finally caught up with him. The article detailed how Ryan had made a series of risky investments, overextending his assets, banking on deals that never materialized. His investors were pulling out, his company was drowning, and with his downfall my parents and Bella were about to lose everything. I leaned back in my chair, clicking through related articles. The end of an era, Westbrook Holdings in crisis. Lavish spending catches up to real estate mogul. Westbrook's inner circle left scrambling. I clicked another one that focused on Bella. A perfect image of my sister, once posed and glowing with luxury, now looked frazzled and broken as she tried to avoid the cameras outside their estate. The very estate my parents had lived in like it was their own. I could picture it now. The panic, the desperation. My parents had built their entire existence around Ryan's wealth, never bothering to secure anything for themselves. They had burned the bridge with me, never thinking twice about what would happen if their golden son-in-law failed. And now their perfect life was over. Then, like a strike of fate, my breath hitched as I scrolled through a property listing. My stomach twisted. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. My childhood home for sale. I clicked on the listing, my breath catching as the familiar walls filled my screen. The house that should have been mine. The house my grandfather had promised me. The house my parents stole to fund Bella's wedding, was now on the market. It was almost poetic. I reached for my phone and dialed Noah's number. He picked up after one ring. Claire. His voice was smooth and steady. He always seemed to know when something big was about to happen. I took a breath, a slow smirk creeping onto my lips. I need you to do something for me. There was a brief pause before he chuckled. That tone of yours is dangerous. What's going on? I spun my chair to face the city skyline outside my office, my grip tightening around the phone. I just found out that my parents' old house is up for sale. Noah exhaled sharply, instantly catching on. The house they sold out from under you? His voice darkened. What do you want to do? Buy it, I replied. Noah went silent for a moment. Elohim, you're serious? Dead serious, I confirmed. I don't care what it costs. Get it for me. Noah never questioned me when I was like this. Consider it done. I exhaled, closing my eyes. The idea of owning it again, of reclaiming the place that was supposed to be mine, sent a wave of satisfaction through me. I would take back what they stole, and this time no one would take it from me. 2 weeks later, the deal was done. The moment the house was officially mine, I stood in front of it, staring up at the place that had once been my sanctuary. The renovations had changed it, but it was still there, the foundation, the structure, the memories, the home that should have been mine all along. I stepped inside, running my fingers along the walls, feeling the echoes of the past whispering through the halls. The real estate agent prattled on about upgrades, market value, and potential resale opportunities, but I barely heard a word. This wasn't an investment, this was justice. The paperwork was signed, the keys were handed over. It was official. The house was mine. For years, I had imagined what it would feel like to stand here, knowing I had taken back what was stolen from me, but nothing could have prepared me for the satisfaction that coursed through me as I stepped onto the property, not as the forgotten daughter, not as the one they cast aside, but as the owner. It wasn't about nostalgia. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about me, about reclaiming what should have been mine all along. The real estate agent rattled off the final details, something about property tax rates and warranty deeds, but I barely heard her. My focus was on the house itself, the grand towering structure that held every memory of my childhood. The walls where I used to trace my fingers while listening to my grandfather's stories. The staircase I used to sit on late at night dreaming of a future where I would finally matter. And now that future was here. The first thing I did was change the locks. It wasn't enough to just own the house. I needed to ensure that this time no one could take it from me. I stood at the doorway as the locksmith worked, watching as the last remnants of their access to my home was stripped away. The way of finality settled over me, the kind that only comes when you know you have one. Would you like to keep the old keys? The locksmith asked, holding them up. I stared at them for a moment before shaking my head. No, I said coolly. They belong to a different life. I watched as he tossed them into his bag, the sound of metal clinking against metal feeling like the last chain breaking off me. By the time I stepped inside, the sun had begun to set, casting a warm golden glow through the windows. I let out a slow breath, drinking in the silence. No more voices demanding that I sacrifice for Bella. No more footsteps of parents who never saw me as their priority. The house was quiet, waiting for me to decide what it would become. I walked through the rooms, taking in the changes the previous owners had made. Some of the renovations were subtle. A new coat of paint, updated fixtures. But beneath it all, the bones of the house remained the same. It was still mine. I ran my fingers along the walls, the memories pressing against me like ghosts of a life I had long abandoned. My grandfather's voice echoed in my mind, full of warmth and unwavering belief in me. One day this house will be yours, Claire. You'll make it into something even greater. I smiled softly. I kept my promise, Grandpa. The house wasn't just a home to me anymore. It was a statement. And the best part? My family had no idea. While I was reclaiming what was mine, my former family was unraveling. Ryan's empire, the one they had built their lives upon, was crumbling. His business, once a financial giant, had been bleeding money for months due to his reckless spending and terrible investments. At first, they had tried to hide it, brushing off rumors of his financial troubles as nothing more than speculation. But the cracks had turned into fractures, and now the truth was unavoidable. He had no choice but to sell off most of his company to an outside investor. And Bella? She was spiraling. Gone was the perfect life of luxury she had flaunted so effortlessly. No more expensive shopping sprees, no more five-star vacations. The high-end designer brand she used to drape herself in had been replaced by panic and desperation. I could only imagine the horror she must have felt watching her world collapse piece by piece. My parents weren't faring any better. Without Ryan's wealth to prop them up, they were drowning in debt. The lavish life they had built had been nothing more than a lie, an illusion funded entirely by someone else's success. And now that success was gone, they were forced to move out of their luxury condo, downsizing to a place that was nowhere near the standard they had grown accustomed to. They had lost everything. And the irony? They had thrown me away for this dream life that was now turning into a nightmare. I had every opportunity to reach out to offer them a lifeline, but I didn't. Not because I wanted revenge, but because they had made their choices, and now they would have to live with them. I sat in the grand living room of my home, sipping a glass of wine as I scrolled through the latest business news. A headline caught my eye. Ryan Carter sells majority shares after financial downfall. New investor takes control. I smirked. It was a shame they didn't know who the new investor was, but they would soon. A notification popped up on my phone. A message from my mother. I raised a brow. For years, I had been nothing more than an afterthought to them. Not a single call, not a single message. But now that their perfect life was crumbling, they suddenly remembered I existed. I didn't even have to open the message to know what it said. They were going to beg. I set my glass down, exhaling slowly. They thought they had erased me. They thought I would always be the forgotten daughter. They thought they had one. They had no idea what was coming. I agreed to meet them, not because I missed them, not because I wanted some kind of reconciliation. I agreed out of curiosity. I wanted to see what they looked like now that their perfect world had fallen apart. I wanted to hear what excuses they had lined up, what lies they had crafted to make themselves feel like their downfall wasn't their fault. I chose a small cafe in the city, a neutral place. One where their presence couldn't taint anything that belonged to me. I arrived early, sipping my coffee by the window, watching people walk by as I waited. When they entered, I could tell immediately that things had changed. My mother, once always dressed in pristine, expensive outfits, looked tired. The lines on her face were deeper, her usual arrogance dimmed by stress. My father, always so proud and condescending, had lost weight. His posture wasn't as stiff. His suit wasn't tailored to perfection anymore. And Bella looked like hell. Gone were the designer brands, the glistening jewelry, the expensive manicures. She looked ordinary, and from the way she fidgeted, pulling at her sleeves, it was clear she hated it. They sat down across from me, forcing polite smiles. "We heard you've been doing well," my mother started. Her voice carefully measured as if she was testing the waters. "Very well, actually." I took a slow sip of my coffee, setting it down with deliberate ease. "Yeah," I said, my tone light. "You could say that things have been great, actually. I just made a big purchase recently." Bella leaned forward, curiosity flickering in her tired eyes. "What kind of purchase?" I let the moment stretch, watching them hang on to my words, desperate for a sliver of information. Then I smiled. "My childhood home." The shift in the atmosphere was instant. Their faces paled. My mother blinked rapidly as if she had misheard me. My father's mouth opened slightly before he quickly composed himself. Bella, on the other hand, froze. "You bought it?" my father asked, his voice strained. I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Well, yes. I saw it was back on the market, and since I could afford it, I figured why not?" Silence. Delicious, painful silence. Then my mother recovered. Overed first, clasping her hands together. "That's wonderful, dear, really. That house, it meant a lot to all of us." I scoffed. "Did it?" She flinched at the sharpness of my tone. Bella was the first to break. She leaned forward, desperation creeping into her voice. "Claire, we need your help." There it was, the real reason for this meeting. I stayed silent, letting her continue. "Things haven't been going great for us," she admitted, her voice tight. "Ryan's business, well, we lost a lot. And Mom and Dad, they had to sell their place too. It's been really hard." I lifted my coffee to my lips, taking a slow sip, enjoying the way she struggled to humble herself. We need a place to stay," my mother added, her voice soft. "And now that you own the house again, maybe we can all go back home as a family." I laughed, loud and genuine, the kind of laugh that turned heads in the cafe. They stared at me, horrified and confused. "You're joking, right?" I asked, wiping a tear from the corner of my eye. "You can't be serious." My father straightened, his pride clearly wounded. "Claire, we are your family." I dropped my smile, leaning forward, my voice lowering to something sharp and cold. "No, you're not." Their eyes widened, but I didn't give them a chance to speak. "Let's take a little trip down memory lane, shall we?" I said, my voice mockingly sweet. "You sold that house to fund Bella's wedding, not mine. Not for some family emergency, for a party. And when I begged you not to, You told me I should be happy for her. They shifted uncomfortably, but I wasn't done. You threw me away like trash because I wasn't a priority to you, and then you never called, never checked in, never asked if I was okay. Bella opened her mouth, but I cut her off with a glare. You didn't invite me to your wedding, I said, my voice ice cold. Do you remember that? You knew how much that house meant to me, and you still threw a wedding with my home as the price tag. My mother reached for my hand, but I pulled away. We made mistakes, Claire, but family is family. I let out a breathy laugh. Family? I repeated. You don't get to use that word now, not after everything. My father exhaled heavily. We're just asking for a little help. I shook my head, my smile returning, but this time it wasn't kind. You don't deserve my help, I said simply. Desperation flickered across their faces. Ciela, please, Bella whispered, her voice cracking. I don't have anywhere else to go. I tilted my head, feigning sympathy. That's funny because when you had everything, I didn't have anywhere to go either. She flinched. I stood up, grabbing my bag. I think we're done here. My mother stood quickly. Claire, wait. I turned back, looking at all three of them. You sold my home, you erased me from your lives, and now you expect me to fix everything for you? I scoffed. No, you made your choice. Live with it. And with that, I walked out of the cafe, this time for good. For the first time in my life, I felt free from the burden of my family's expectations, free from the guilt they had piled onto my shoulders for years, free from the weight of trying to earn love that was never meant for me. I had walked out of that cafe without looking back. The moment I stepped outside, something inside me shifted. The past no longer owned me. My family would have to face their own consequences. They had spent their entire lives chasing wealth, prestige, and status, thinking that they could always use someone else to keep themselves afloat. First it had been Ryan, then it was me, but now they had no one. Ryan was barely holding on to the remnants of his failed business, and without his money to support them, my parents had nothing left. They would have to live with the choices they made, just like I had. Returning to my childhood home felt different now. Before, it had been a painful symbol of what I had lost, what they had stolen from me, but now it was mine. The first night I walked through the house, slowly running my fingers along the familiar wooden banisters, the old bookshelves, the windowsills where I used to sit and dream about a better life. And now I had it. I had built something for myself, and no one could take it away from me this time. I spent the next few weeks making small changes, nothing drastic, nothing that erased the past entirely. Just enough to make the house feel like home again. I repainted the walls, replaced old furniture, and brought in new comfortable pieces that reflected who I had become. I filled the space with light instead of the suffocating shadows of my family. I spent my mornings drinking coffee by the large bay window in the kitchen, watching the sun rise over the garden. I took long walks through the neighborhood, rediscovering the small joys I had forgotten over the years. And most importantly, I allowed myself to be happy. Through everything, Noah had been by my side. He had watched me struggle, fight, and claw my way out of the life my family had trapped me in. And now he was here, watching me finally breathe. One evening we sat on the back porch, the soft hum of cicadas filling the warm night air. A bottle of wine sat between us, half empty, and I could feel the tension in my shoulders easing as I stared up at the stars. You seem lighter, Noah said after a while, his voice gentle. I turned to him, tilting my head. Lighter. He nodded, taking a sip of his wine. Yeah, like you finally let go of something you've been carrying for a long time. I thought about that. For years I had resented my family. I had ached for their approval, their love. I had wasted so much energy trying to be enough for them, and now I had nothing left to give them. I smiled, leaning back in my chair. I think you're right. Noah reached over, brushing his fingers against mine. I'm proud of you, you know? A warmth spread through my chest, something soft and unfamiliar. Pride, not from my family, not from someone who only saw me as a means to an end, but real pride from someone who saw me. I squeezed his hand. Thank you. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars, listening to the night, and for the first time, in years, I felt at peace without the weight of my past dragging me down. I focused on what made me happy. My business was thriving, growing bigger than I had ever imagined. I expanded, investing in new projects, mentoring young entrepreneurs, and creating opportunities for people who, like me, had been overlooked and underestimated. It was fulfilling more than money, more than success. It was the knowledge that I had built this without my family's help, that I had made it on my own. I also allowed myself to enjoy the little things. Lazy Sunday mornings in bed with Noah, tangled in soft sheets and laughter, dinners with friends filling my home with warmth and love, quiet evenings spent reading, curled up in the living room with a hot cup of tea. A life that was mine. I wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. I wasn't the girl they could throw away. I was Claire, and I had finally come home.